Okay, what I want to talk about now is how I'm putting things together and what you can expect. Now, you can see I've got the printed out one here. And in here, because when I'm working on new stuff, I stick things in bags. So you can see I've got it labeled, always label everything. For this particular doll, a 9 by 12 inch piece of felt will work. I am working with wool felt, 100% wool felt. It's a little stiffer. I would like to experiment with some different kinds of fabric, but I'm going to need to do more research on that because primarily I use cottons and felt and acrylic felts for what I work on. So a 9 by 12 will make one color doll using this smaller version of it, not the 11 by 17 size. So what I normally do, okay, because if you've been with me long enough, you know that I tend to make all of my pattern pieces into cardboard because then I can very easily trace it. Now, one of the first things that you'll notice, get some of this out of the way, is that this is bigger. You can see here, this is bigger. Now, in the altered pattern that I'm going to be putting up onto my Patreon for free download, you will get these pattern pieces. You don't have to do this yourself. But part of this is I want to teach you how I do these, how I walk through and do these alterations. How I try one thing, I try another thing, see what works, see what doesn't. Now, it just so happens I like this longer body pattern, and it needed to be longer because of the way I was sewing, the different way I was sewing. Instead of an exposed seam where I'm sewing everything from the outside, for these pieces, I have flipped them so the limbs and the arms and legs are on the inside. I stitch around and then I flip it inside out. Now, I needed more room to do that. I'm going to tell you right here, I just guessed. I kind of looked and went, okay, it needs to be a little longer. What is a little longer? And this is one of the tools that really, really helps me out when I'm working with smaller dolls. Because prior to the last couple of years, when I say the last couple of years, almost the last 10 years, previous to that, my dolls were much, much bigger. I added on about 2.6 centimeters of space on here. And how did I come up with that? I just looked at it and I did it by eye. Now, I'm not exactly sure why that works. Some of this you got to chalk up to I've been making art a long time and I kind of know when things look right. And when I say look right, I mean balanced, in proportion. Remember how I was talking about how this particular piece, the arms were too long. They are too long for this body. If I kept these arms this length, then the legs need to shrink. If I wanted to keep this, I don't know how to describe this. I know when it's in proportion and when it's not. I know that when I was being taught how to do my own proportions and how to think about proportion in design, because my background is graphic design, it was the golden ratio. And if you don't know about the golden ratio, look it up. I'll put a link or something in there so you can look at that. I just know when it looks right. And that just sounds like such a load of crud, you know. I know this looks right. I know this looks right. I know these legs are right. I just know. And remember, if you don't know, it's simply because you haven't stretched or used that muscle in your head as much as I have. So the I went ahead and cut out the regular paper pattern, and I like using clear plastic bags. You can see up here on my, oh, if you can see here, I've got patterns and things that are up on plastic bags so I can see them. I like being at the clear ones so I can see what's in it. These are just the paper pattern pieces that I cut out, and I'd done some measurements to help me find the right size of eyes on these. So I keep these around just in case. Everything else has been transferred to cardboard. And well, I should say cardboard, carton board. And you can see here, I have, this was the leg right off the pattern that I went ahead and lengthened already. Then I tried the longer leg, and then I decided I liked the length of this leg, but I wanted to change so it wasn't so pointy. And the way that I do that is I simply have cardboard next to me. This one's a pizza box. And I lay pieces down and trace them with a pencil. So another thing you're going to need is a pencil. It doesn't have to be an automatic pencil like this, or like this one. It can be any kind of pencil. Sometimes I will use ballpoint pen, but I like the pencil because I can change things around. So if I want to, I can erase something out and change it. So that's something that I use. And this is like off a pizza box. It's, you know, you don't have to use anything super duper expensive. Then I make sure I've labeled everything. I've also, knowing that I'm going to be tucking these inside, I make sure I add on how much is going to go on to the inside. Now, once all of that is done, then it's time to start tracing onto the fabric. And as I stated, I'm using 100% wool. I know that can be a little pricey for some, and you don't have to use that. You can use anything you want. You can use fabric scraps. You can use an old blanket. Go to a resale shop or secondhand shop and find something. I am absolutely like mourning my inability to get to a good secondhand shop like Eco Center in Finland. Harjun Eco Center was like, oh my god, the Kirja, so much stuff you could get there, and it was like super cheap. So I've talked about a little bit about the pattern and how I want to show you how I trace. So let's put that over there, and I'm going to grab a piece of felt over here. And this is just a piece of wool felt. I'm going to use this color because you can actually see it. This is half of an 18 by 12. So I can make a whole additional doll out of this. One of the things that I do is I do this weird, I don't think it's weird, because felt is a laid fabric. It doesn't necessarily have, it's not woven, it's laid and mashed down together. So depending on where you are in the bolt, depending upon the manufacturer, depending upon the fiber content, you're going to get a different kind of, like here I'm doing a gentle pull to see how much give the fabric is. Does it stretch more this way, or does it stretch more this way? And I tend to do this by just putting 2 fingers down and pushing apart a little bit. This tends to stretch a little less in this direction, which is probably how it came off the bolt or off the machine. So, wow, my camera work seriously is not fabulous. Now, one of the things that I use, which is I don't think normal, and when I say normal, what other people use, you can use the freezer paper method. The reason I don't use the freezer paper method is because I am always terrified that I'm going to dull my scissors, which I don't want to do. The other reason is I feel as though it wastes a lot of felt. If I just take this pattern and print it out and put it down, I don't get a chance to fit things the way that I want to fit them onto the felt. So that is the reason why I don't use the freezer paper method. If you are somebody who's just going to make one of these, using freezer paper is absolutely fine. But for someone like me who's always trying to figure out how I can squeeze out another couple of pieces, you know. So you can also see here that I don't, wow, this is really crooked. There we go. I also labeled these. Don't forget to label. I don't put these to the edge either because there tends to be a bit, remember, it's not woven. So this will be a little looser on the edges. So I usually position it such or so. Now this is a colored ballpoint pen. This sticks enough to the wool felt. And when I say sticks enough, it doesn't stick super well, which is something I really like. Now, you can see I'm kind of going back and forth around the piece, and I'm holding it down pretty firmly, and then moving my hands to make sure I can get all the way around. And then when I lift up, you can see it. Now, when it comes to cutting these out, I don't want these lines on my piece, my finished piece, because we're just making another one of these right here with this piece. When I'm cutting out, you can see the line right there. I don't cut on the line. I cut a little bit to the inside of it. Can you see how the line is here and not here? Now, there are times in which I am incredibly lazy and I just go ahead and chop right on the line, and I end up with ballpoint pen on my piece. Now, for just expediency purpose, I'm just going to do that. So you can see I'm cutting all the way around, and there are times in which I will do this, and you can see, oh crap, she's got so much on there. It's totally going to show up. Here's one of the things that I do that I think is kind of weird, but it's a way that I've learned to work with felt. Now, because I work with felt so much, when you're cutting felt, because it's very dimensional, that's about like a 1.5 millimeters, maybe 2 millimeters thick. Instead of cutting straight, sometimes you're cutting almost at a diagonal, and you'll get this little edge on the edge facing you that kind of pokes out a little bit. I take another pair of scissors that is not as sharp as these. This is my regular one. And if I have anything, because the felt is dimensional, meaning it has height, width, and depth, I can carefully come in and nip these off. So if you decide to try to use this same ballpoint method, and no, mind you, I use a ballpoint pen that's in the same family. I don't use black on yellow. I use a pink or an orange that either I can disguise or is something that is in that same color family, on that same side of the color wheel. And you can see, let me see if I can gather these up. There's like little fluffs that have a little bit of there it went. Little fluffs that have the ink on it. Now, another thing that I do, in addition to trimming these off, is instead of, and because it's dimensional, you can do that. I hacked off quite a nice little wad right there. Because this is now similar, but not exactly the same, what I do is, because I want it to match up, and yes, I know that's still there, I flip it over. Well, actually, I shouldn't flip it over. Because this is going to be stitched along this outside edge and flipped on the inside out. I will simply pin it down and then cut it out using this as the piece that's supposed to be matched to it as a pattern piece. This just means that as I'm sewing, this piece will match better than if I had simply traced another one out. Now, when I do this, I am a lot more careful, and I always want to keep my scissors as I don't want to twist them or turn them while I'm working, and I'm cutting right along that edge all the way around. And sometimes I will have to lay it down. The thing that always bugs me is I'm so impatient and I want everything done immediately that I will sometimes just do a hack job. It's just, I tell myself to slow down. And then I can check here to make sure that things are matching. This worked. I do this a lot, especially if I don't know how to say this. If I'm cutting something out and I don't have a pattern, or just don't, for whatever reason, feel like using a pattern, and believe me, there are times that I do that, I will, I carefully match up the pieces. And notice when I get to these corners, I'm going to hold this down so that's really in place and just nip that little tiny bit off. And go back here, you can see where that's not quite matched. The my inner Wilmaness gets to me. And then after this is taken out, this is cut, I take the pins out. One of the reasons I take the pins out is sometimes when you're working on something and you get started on it, you have the pins in it, and then something else takes your attention away. And maybe your piece sits for a week or maybe more. Especially with thick felts or thick fabrics like this, you'll get these weird indentations, and depending upon the levels of humidity or where the piece is, you'll get sometimes little bits of rust or other weird little accumulations. I always take them out and leave them flat. Take the pins out and leave them as flat as possible. And felt is nice because it has a bit of a tooth to it. It's not going to slip and slide. Especially wool felt is not going to slip and slide. It kind of grabs. The fibers kind of grab onto other things and don't let them go. So from there, I simply go on to the rest of the pieces that I'm going to be cutting out. And I do the same thing with the legs and the arms. Trace one, flip it, cut it out, flip it, cut again. And you'll see on the beady pattern, any of the monster patterns on the second page of the pattern, I give some layout instructions, but if you've ever watched any of my instructional videos before, this is just something that I do. I don't know if there's anybody else out there who actively says, you know, trace this and then flip it and take the piece and use your pre-cut piece as a pattern piece. I don't know. This is more about the way that I put things together than anything else. So this video is getting a little long. I'll see you in the next video.